Safa Bular. On April 27, 2017, London, England became the center of one of Britain's most shocking terror plots. The person at the heart of it was Safa Bular, just 16 years old, who had been groomed online by an Islamic State recruiter and was now planning to attack the British Museum with weapons. Her case would make her one of the UK's youngest female terrorism convicts. But what drove this teenager to plot such devastation in her own country? Bular had met Naweed Hussein online, an IS recruiter who became her so-called husband through an online Islamic marriage. Around November 2016, he proposed something chilling. She would testify later about this moment, saying, "Around November, he proposed to me about an attack at Christmas. He asked me if I was scared of being in an attack, and I told him, yes, I am." Initially, Bular planned to travel to Syria for what she called a suicide mission, but authorities prevented her departure. Undeterred, she shifted her focus to Britain itself. Using coded language and online conversations, she discussed targeting the British Museum. Words like Tokarev meant weapons, while pineapples referred to grenades. After Hussein's death in Syria, she confided in people she believed were fellow supporters, but they were actually undercover MI5 officers. What made this particularly disturbing was how ordinary Bular seemed on the surface. She lived with diabetes and had experienced periods of isolation, but friends and family struggled to understand how deep her radicalization had become. The grooming had taken root through online channels, transforming her worldview entirely. Could anyone have stopped this before it went so far? Her arrest on April 27, 2017, came as part of a wider operation that included her sister Rizlaine and mother Mina Dik. Investigators found extensive online communications and materials that painted a clear picture of her intentions. She had been in regular contact with IS members and had absorbed their ideology completely. The trial at the Old Bailey revealed the extent of her planning. Prosecutors showed messages, phones seized from the family home, and evidence of her communications with handlers overseas. She was found guilty of plotting the attack and attempting to travel to Syria to join IS. Judge Mark Dennis QC sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum of 13 years in August 2018. During sentencing, he made clear his view of her culpability, stating, "Her views were deeply entrenched. However much she may have been influenced, she knew what she was doing and acted with open eyes." The plot was thwarted before anyone could be harmed, but the case raised urgent questions about online radicalization and how vulnerable young people could be recruited so effectively. Bular remains in a UK prison, serving her sentence while authorities continue examining how to prevent similar cases. No lives were lost, but the potential for tragedy had been very real. But what happens when fear and denial push someone to an unthinkable act? Paris, Mayo. On March 23, 2019, Ross-on-Wye, Herefordshire, England, witnessed a tragedy that would shock the nation. Paris Mayo gave birth to a son she had concealed for months, then ended his life in a moment of panic and terror. The case would raise painful questions about how a young mother could take such drastic action against her own newborn. But what could drive a teenager to commit such an act? Mayo had hidden her pregnancy from everyone, including herself in many ways. When she went into labor alone in her home, she gave birth to Stanley without any medical assistance. What happened next would become the subject of intense legal scrutiny. The baby suffered severe head injuries and was found with cotton wool stuffed in his throat. The injuries were comparable to those seen in car crashes. After ending Stanley's life, Mayo placed his body in a bin bag and left it on her doorstep. Her mother discovered it and immediately called emergency services. The discovery led to Mayo's arrest and the beginning of a case that would divide public opinion. During the investigation, Mayo claimed she had not known she was pregnant and that what happened was accidental. She told authorities that despite being large in build, she had attributed physical changes to weight gain. She later admitted in therapy that she had been aware but was in denial, terrified of how her family would react. How could someone hide such a reality from themselves and others? Interestingly, she acknowledged that her mother would likely have been supportive, making her fear all the more tragic. The prosecution argued this was not infanticide driven by postpartum disturbance, but deliberate action. The trial took place at Worcester Crown Court in 2023, lasting 5 weeks. Mayo maintained her claims of accident and ignorance, but the jury rejected this version of events. Medical evidence showed the extent of Stanley's injuries and the nature of the actions taken against him. Judge Mr. Justice Garnham delivered the verdict and sentencing, telling Mayo, "You decided you had to finish Stanley off." She was convicted of taking her son's life and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12 years. Her defense team emphasized her vulnerability and lack of support, arguing she was vulnerable, not supported. This will be a life sentence in every sense. Stanley lived only briefly, but his short life ended in pain. Mayo serves her sentence in a UK facility, facing decades behind bars for a decision made in moments. The case highlighted the desperate situations that can arise when young people feel they have no one to turn to, even when help might have been available. While this case involved family tragedy, the next would center on jealousy between peers. Maricela Nicolasa Diaz. In 2009, Mitchell, South Dakota, became the setting for one of the state's most disturbing cases. Maricela Diaz and her boyfriend Alexander Salgado took the life of Jasmine Guevara in an act driven by jealousy and control. The case would take years to reach trial, finally concluding in 2015. But what circumstances led two people to turn on someone they knew? Diaz had been in a relationship with Salgado since early adolescence, a relationship that investigators later described as troubled. When Salgado showed interest in Jasmine Guevara, Diaz's jealousy intensified. Rather than ending the relationship, she made plans to eliminate her perceived rival. On the day of the incident, Diaz and Salgado lured Guevara to what they claimed was a cookout. Instead, they attacked her, causing fatal injuries. They then placed Guevara in the trunk of her own vehicle while she was still alive. In a Hanson County field, they set the car ablaze using lighter fluid. Jasmine died in the fire. The investigation moved quickly. Both Diaz and Salgado were arrested in 2009, but the legal proceedings became complicated. Diaz's case required a venue change and multiple hearings before reaching trial. She was tried as an adult despite being young at the time of the incident. What drives someone to such extremes over a relationship? Diaz came from an immigrant family and had dropped out of school before the incident occurred. Friends and acquaintances described the relationship with Salgado as unhealthy, but none anticipated it would lead to such consequences. The trial took place in 2015, 6 years after Guevara's death. During proceedings, prosecutors detailed how Diaz had participated in the planning and execution. The prosecutor stated, "Ms. Diaz made a choice. Jasmine ended up burning alive," emphasizing the calculated nature of the actions. Guevara's mother gave emotional testimony, saying through tears, "It made me feel very bad. My heart was squeezed," as she described learning what happened to her daughter. Diaz was convicted of first-degree homicide, arson, and kidnapping. Because of her age at the time of the incident, she could not receive a mandatory life sentence under South Dakota law. Instead, she received a life-eligible term, meaning she would serve significant time before any possibility of release. Diaz remains in a South Dakota prison, serving her sentence for a decision made in jealousy. Jasmine Guevara was 16 when her life ended. She had trusted people she thought were friends, never imagining their intentions. The next case would show how jealousy in relationships can escalate when warnings go unheeded. Rachel Wade. On April 14, 2009, Pinellas Park, Florida became the scene of a confrontation that would end in death. Rachel Wade and Sarah Ludeman met face-to-face after months of escalating threats, all centered on their shared romantic interest in a man named Joshua Camacho. By the end of the night, Ludeman would be gone, and Wade would face a lifetime of consequences. But how did teenage rivalry turn into something so final? Wade and Ludeman had both been involved with Camacho, and their conflict played out publicly through voicemails, text messages, and social media. The threats grew increasingly serious over time. In one voicemail that would later be played in court, Wade told Ludeman, "I'm guaranteeing you that I'm going to fucking take you out." On the night of April 14th, Ludeman drove to Wade's location after a series of heated phone exchanges. What happened next was captured through witness testimony and physical evidence. During the confrontation, Wade had a weapon and used it, striking Ludeman directly in the heart. The wound was fatal. Wade was arrested within hours and immediately claimed she had acted in self-defense, arguing that Ludeman had been the aggressor. She maintained that she only meant to protect herself when the situation turned physical. However, the evidence told a different story. Could this have been prevented if someone had intervened earlier? The investigation uncovered months of documentation showing Wade's aggressive stance toward Ludeman. Text messages, voicemails, and social media posts painted a picture of someone who had repeatedly threatened harm. Friends of both women testified about the ongoing feud and how it had consumed their social circles. Many had witnessed the threats, but never believed it would actually happen. Wade's trial took place in 2010. Prosecutors argued that this was not self-defense, but the culmination of months of threats finally being carried out. They presented the voicemails and messages as evidence of premeditation and intent. The jury rejected Wade's self-defense claim. She was convicted of second-degree homicide, acknowledging the serious nature of her actions while recognizing it had not been planned long in advance. During sentencing, the judge noted she had caused a lot of pain to Ludeman's family and community. Wade received a sentence of 27 years in prison, with a projected release date in 2032. She remains in a Florida correctional facility, where she has now spent over a decade reflecting on the choice that changed multiple lives forever. Sarah Ludeman was just 18, with her whole future ahead of her. The love triangle that had seemed so important to those involved ended with her family left to grieve an irreplaceable loss. But sometimes the ultimate betrayal comes from within the family itself. Jennifer Pan. In 2010, Markham, Ontario became the site of what initially appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong. Attackers burst into the Pan family home, restraining Jennifer Pan and taking her parents upstairs. Shots rang out, leaving Jennifer's mother Beach dead and her father Han severely wounded. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking truth. Jennifer herself had orchestrated the entire attack. But what could drive someone to plan such an act against their own family? Jennifer had grown up under what many described as extremely strict parenting. Her parents pushed for academic excellence and closely controlled her life choices. leading her to fabricate an entire false life. She pretended to attend university, forged report cards, and invented a career as a pharmacist. In reality, she had been living with her boyfriend, Daniel Wong, someone her parents forbade her to see. The lies eventually began to collapse. Her parents discovered the deception and gave her an ultimatum: break up with Wong and live under their rules, or leave and be cut off. Jennifer's response was to hire people to stage a home invasion and eliminate her parents, inheriting their estate and gaining her freedom in one move. On the night of the attack, 3 men entered the home. Jennifer claimed she was tied up alongside her parents, making her appear to be a victim. Beach Pan was shot and died from her injuries. Han Pan survived, but was left blinded by his wounds. He would later become a key witness against his daughter. How could a daughter orchestrate something so unthinkable? Initially, police treated Jennifer as a surviving victim. But as they interviewed her repeatedly, inconsistencies emerged in her story. Details changed between tellings, and her timeline didn't match the evidence. Investigators grew suspicious and subjected her to intense interrogation. During one interrogation session, Jennifer eventually confessed, though she tried to frame it as, "I tried to have myself killed, not parents." The evidence told a different story. Phone records, financial transactions, and testimony from accomplices showed she had planned and paid for the attack. Jennifer's background revealed the pressure she had been under. Her parents had immigrated from Vietnam and placed enormous emphasis on success, expecting their daughter to become a doctor or achieve similar status. When she failed to meet these expectations, she created an elaborate fiction rather than disappointing them. And when that fiction fell apart, she chose an unthinkable solution. Her trial took place in 2015, 5 years after the attack. Prosecutors presented evidence of planning, communication with the hired individuals, and financial payments. Her father Han testified against her, describing the night of the attack and his realization that his daughter had betrayed him. Jennifer was convicted of first-degree homicide of her mother and attempted homicide of her father. She received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years. However, in a significant development, a retrial was ordered for 2025 on appeal, meaning her case remains open. Beach Pan died believing she was the victim of a random home invasion, never knowing her own daughter had planned it. Han Pan survived, but lost his sight and his wife, while learning the devastating truth about Jennifer's role. While Jennifer's betrayal centered on escaping control, the next case involved someone trusted with care: Emma Tustin. On June 16, 2020, Solihull, England became the location of one of the UK's most heartbreaking cases. Emma Tustin lived with her partner Thomas Hughes and faced serious charges. Over months, the situation deteriorated until it ended in tragedy, exposing failures at multiple levels to protect a vulnerable person. But how did someone entrusted with care inflict such harm? Tustin and Hughes created conditions in their home that shocked even experienced investigators. The situation included isolation, withholding food, and salt poisoning designed to cause maximum distress. On the final day, June 16th, Tustin inflicted the head injury that would prove fatal. The evidence against Tustin was extensive. Investigators recovered recordings from phones in the home that documented the situation. In one particularly chilling message to Hughes, Tustin wrote, "I want you, but I don't want him," revealing her attitude toward the person in her care. Medical evidence showed the extent of harm inflicted over time, including evidence of salt poisoning, malnutrition, and the final head trauma. Neighbors reported hearing distress, but did not realize the severity of the situation. Social services had been involved previously, but had closed the case, a decision that would later be heavily criticized. What warning signs were missed along the way? Tustin's background revealed little that explained her actions. She had no prior record of such behavior, making the situation all the more confusing for those who knew her. The relationship with Hughes appeared to be the catalyst, with both feeding off each other's worst impulses. The trial revealed the full scope of what had occurred. Prosecutors presented evidence of deliberate cruelty, calculated to degrade and harm. The jury heard testimony about isolation and punishment that served no purpose except to cause suffering. Tustin was convicted of taking a life, while Hughes was convicted of manslaughter for his role in the mistreatment. During sentencing, the judge described the treatment as cruel and inhuman, words that barely captured the horror of what had been documented. Tustin received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years. Hughes received 24 years for his part in the mistreatment and for enabling the final outcome. Both sentences reflected the court's view that this was among the most serious cases of its kind. Tustin serves her sentence at HMP Peterborough, where she will remain for decades. The case led to a nationwide review of safeguarding procedures in England, with questions raised about how such a situation could develop undetected. Multiple agencies had been involved with the family, yet the warning signs were missed or dismissed. The tragedy sparked urgent calls for reform in how vulnerable individuals are protected. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. While Tustin's case shocked a nation, the next would reveal a friendship twisted by dark obsessions. Valerie Parashumti. On June 21, 2006, Perth, Australia became the scene of a case that would horrify the nation. Valerie Parashumti and Jessica Stasinovsky took the life of Stacey Mitchell, a teenager they had befriended, in an act so calculated and disturbing that it would later be described as one of Australia's most shocking cases. The two women shared an obsession with ideas of taking a life, and they carried out their plan with chilling precision. But what drives two people to bond over such dark fantasies? Stacey Mitchell had been friends with both women and trusted them completely. On that June evening, she went to their shared home in Coolbalup, believing she was visiting friends. Instead, she walked into a situation that had been carefully planned. The two women attacked her, using both bludgeoning and strangling methods to end her life. What made this case particularly disturbing was the motive. Parashumti and Stasinovsky were fascinated by what they called the idea of taking someone's life and had discussed it for weeks, building up to the moment when they would act on their impulses. Stacey became their chosen target, selected not for any personal conflict, but simply because she was available and trusting. The attack was brutal and prolonged. Stacey was struck with a concrete slab and then strangled with a chain, taking 45 minutes to pass. After Stacey died, they wrapped her body and placed it in a wheelie bin, which they left in their backyard. They then went about their lives as if nothing had happened, even as Stacey's family desperately searched for her. The discovery came days later when police, following tips and investigating Stacey's last known movements, found her remains. How could two people carry out such an act and then continue normally? The investigation revealed disturbing details about both women. Parashumti had grown up with a troubled background, including reports of a difficult family environment. Her father had been imprisoned for harming her mother, creating an unstable home life. Since childhood, Parashumti had been obsessed with ideas associated with vampire culture. a fascination that had begun when she was around 10 years old. She and Stasinowski had formed a close bond, one that seemed to reinforce their darkest impulses rather than provide healthy friendship. They fed off each other's fantasies and encouraged each other toward increasingly disturbing thoughts. Evidence later showed they had even filmed portions of what happened, treating it as entertainment rather than recognizing the horror of their actions. What warning signs did others miss? During interviews with investigators, both women admitted to feeling excitement about what they had done. This lack of remorse shocked even experienced detectives who had seen numerous cases. The psychological evaluations revealed that Parashumpti had a severe personality disorder, one that manifested in being drawn to scenes of harm. Both women pleaded guilty to the charges against them, avoiding a lengthy trial. During the sentencing hearing in 2008, the judge struggled to find words adequate to describe what had occurred. The judge stated, "The evilness of your crime. You were aroused and excited by the act itself," making clear the court's view of their motivations. Parashumpti received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. Stasinowski received a similar sentence. Both were sent to separate facilities to serve their time. The case raised questions about subcultures that glorify harm and how young people can become involved in such communities. In 2013, Parashumpti made news again when she attempted to escape from prison, though she was quickly recaptured. As of 2025, Parashumpti remains in an Australian prison, serving her sentence with no recent updates on parole eligibility or behavioral changes. The minimum term means she will not be eligible for release until at least 2032. And given the nature of her actions and lack of demonstrated remorse, release may never be granted. Stacy Mitchell was 16 when her life ended. She had trusted two people she considered friends, never imagining their intentions. Her family continues to advocate for awareness about warning signs of dangerous behavior in young people. But the next case would involve family turning on family in the most unimaginable way. Jasmia Whitehead and Tasmia Whitehead. On January 13, 2010, Conyers, Georgia became the scene of one of the most shocking family cases in recent memory. Twin sisters Jasmia and Tasmia Whitehead took the life of their own mother, Nikki Whitehead, during what began as a household argument. The case would raise painful questions about family dynamics and what can drive children to such desperate actions against a parent. But what could push two teenagers to turn on their mothers so completely? The twins had been raised largely by their great-grandmother, Della Frazier, due to their mother's frequent absences and inability to provide stable care. When Nikki eventually took them back into her home, the transition was turbulent. The household was marked by strict rules and constant conflict over expectations and behavior. On that January morning, a fight erupted between the twins and their mother over household issues. What started as a verbal argument quickly escalated into something physical. The situation spiraled out of control, with both twins participating in the attack against Nikki. She was beaten, then suffered stab wounds, and was ultimately held underwater. After their mother died, the twins left for school as if nothing had happened. When they returned home later that day, they called emergency services, claiming they had discovered their mother's body. They acted shocked and devastated, giving statements about finding her and not knowing what could have happened. Could investigators see through their performance? The investigation immediately found inconsistencies in the twins' statements. Their timeline didn't match the evidence, and forensic analysis showed that Nikki had been gone for hours before they called for help. Blood patterns, drag marks, and other physical evidence painted a picture completely different from what the twins described. Detectives also discovered audio recordings from inside the family car that captured conversations between the twins discussing what had happened. These recordings became key evidence, showing their awareness and participation in the events. Under pressure from mounting evidence, both twins eventually confessed to their roles in their mother's death. They described the fight and how it had escalated beyond anything they had imagined. Jasmia would later say, "I'm sorry. It was just confusion and turmoil," attempting to explain the moment that changed their lives forever. What made this particularly tragic was the twins' background. Before this incident, they had been honor students, doing well academically and showing promise for their futures. Friends and teachers struggled to reconcile the young women they knew with the ones who committed such an act against their own mother. The legal proceedings focused on whether this was planned or happened in the moment. Both twins pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter rather than face trial for first-degree charges. This plea allowed them to avoid the possibility of life sentences without parole. Acknowledging that while their actions were serious, they arose from a situation that escalated rapidly rather than careful planning. Each twin received a sentence of 30 years in prison. The sentences were handed down in 2014, 4 years after Nikki's death. During sentencing, the judge acknowledged the complexity of the case while emphasizing that family conflicts, no matter how serious, never justify such actions. As of 2025, both twins remain incarcerated in Georgia facilities. Tasmia is at Arundel State Prison and is scheduled for parole consideration in March 2026. Jasmia is at Pulaski State Prison with parole eligibility coming in September 2027. Whether either will be granted parole remains uncertain. Nikki Whitehead was 34 when her life ended at the hands of her own daughters. The case highlighted the complicated nature of family relationships and the importance of intervention when household tensions escalate. While this case centered on family conflict, the next would cross international borders with a controversial verdict. Nahir Galarza. On December 29, 2017, Gualeguaychú, Argentina became the center of a case that would captivate the nation and spark fierce debate. Nahir Galarza shot her boyfriend Fernando Pastorizo twice, ending his life in what prosecutors argued was a deliberate act. Her trial and conviction would make her the youngest woman in Argentina to receive a life sentence, and her case remains controversial to this day. But what led to that fatal night? Galarza and Pastorizo had been in a relationship that friends and family described as turbulent. They had known each other for years, with their families also being acquainted. The relationship was marked by periods of intensity, followed by breakups, with both displaying possessive behavior toward each other. On that December night, the two met up, and what happened next would be disputed throughout the legal proceedings. Galarza shot Pastorizo twice with a weapon belonging to her father, who was a police officer. One shot struck him in the back, and the second hit his chest from close range, around 50 centimeters away. Forensic evidence showed the second shot was particularly significant, delivered at close range in a way that suggested intentional action rather than panic or accident. Pastorizo died from his injuries, and his body was discovered shortly after the incident. How did investigators piece together what happened? The investigation moved quickly, with security camera footage placing Galarza near the scene at the time of the incident. Text messages between the couple also revealed a pattern of conflict and threats, though interpretations of these messages would vary depending on who was analyzing them. Galarza initially gave statements to police, eventually admitting to the action. However, her defense would argue various scenarios, including claims of mistreatment from Pastorizo and suggestions that the situation was more complicated than prosecutors presented. She would later say, It never even crossed my mind that he was going to pass away," attempting to explain her state of mind. The trial became a media sensation in Argentina. Galarza was a law student from a respectable family, and many found it difficult to reconcile her appearance and background with the charges against her. Some argued she was being judged more harshly because of her looks and gender, while others insisted the evidence was clear. Could this have been something other than what it appeared? The prosecution presented evidence of premeditation and intent, arguing that the nature of the wounds and the circumstances surrounding them showed calculated action. The defense countered with claims of mistreatment and self-protection, though the court ultimately rejected these arguments. Galarza was convicted of aggravated homicide and received a life sentence, which in Argentina means a minimum of 35 years before parole eligibility. The verdict sparked protests and debates about whether young women receive fair treatment in the justice system, or whether, in this case, privilege had actually provided advantages during the trial. Adding complexity to the case, Galarza later made claims about her father's involvement in 2022, suggesting the situation was even more complicated than originally presented. These claims were investigated, but did not result in changes to her conviction. While in prison, Galarza has studied psychology and has been described by some media as composed and focused on her education. In recent times, she requested permission to use phones and social media, citing exemplary conduct, though this request sparked public outrage and was denied. As of 2025, Galarza remains at Penal Unit 6 in Paraná, serving her life sentence. Her appeals have been exhausted, meaning she will serve the full minimum term before any possibility of release. The case continues to be discussed in Argentina as an example of complicated relationship dynamics and questions about justice. Fernando Pastorizo was 20 when he died. His family continues to seek closure while Galarza serves her sentence, with the truth of that night still debated by those following the case. But our next case would involve something even stranger than relationship conflict. Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser. On May 31st, 2014, Waukesha, Wisconsin became the site of an incident so bizarre it would make international headlines. Two friends, Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser, led their classmate Peyton Leutner into the woods and attacked her, driven by their belief in an online fictional character called Slender Man. The case would raise urgent questions about internet culture, mental health, and how young people process reality. But how could an online story drive such actions? Weier and Geyser had become obsessed with Slender Man, a fictional character created in online forums that depicted a tall, faceless figure who supposedly harmed people. The girls spent months reading stories about this character on a website dedicated to such creations, and somewhere along the way, their understanding of fiction and reality became dangerously blurred. They came to believe that Slender Man was real and that they needed to prove their loyalty to him. In their minds, the way to do this was to take someone's life. They chose their friend Peyton, not out of any conflict with her, but simply because she was accessible and trusted them. On that May morning, the three went into the woods near a park, ostensibly to play. Once they were isolated, Weier and Geyser attacked Peyton with a weapon, striking her 19 times. The wounds hit her arms, legs, and torso, with some coming dangerously close to vital organs and arteries. How did Peyton survive such an attack? After the attack, Weier and Geyser left Peyton in the woods, believing she would not survive. However, Peyton managed to crawl out of the woods to a path where a cyclist found her and called for help. The wounds had come within millimeters of a major artery, and doctors later said she was extremely fortunate to have survived. Police found Weier and Geyser walking along a highway, still carrying the weapon used in the attack. When questioned, they immediately explained their belief about Slender Man and their need to prove themselves to him. Their statements were so matter-of-fact about their delusions that investigators realized they were dealing with something beyond typical motives. During interviews, the differences between the two became apparent. Geyser showed little emotion or understanding of the severity of what had happened, later saying she felt no regret at the time. Psychiatric evaluation revealed that Geyser had been experiencing hallucinations and delusions from an early age, eventually diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia. Wire, while also believing in Slender Man, appeared more capable of understanding the reality of their actions as time went on. She would later express guilt, saying, "I'm sorry. I hate my actions," during her hearings. What role did mental health play in this tragedy? Both girls were charged as adults initially, though their young age sparked debate. Eventually, both pleaded guilty to attempted homicide and were committed to mental health institutions rather than traditional prisons. Wire received 25 years and Geyser received 40 years in institutional commitment, with treatment being a primary focus. Remarkably, Peyton Leutner survived and has spoken publicly about her experience. In 2019, she thanked Geyser for inspiring her to pursue a career in medicine, turning her trauma into motivation to help others. As of 2025, Wire was released in 2021 and remains under supervision until 2039. Geyser was conditionally released in July 2025 to a group home after years of treatment and multiple denied release requests. She will remain under supervision until 2058. While this case involved delusions, the next would center on jealousy and peer conflict. Hope Rippey. On January 11, 1992, Madison, Indiana became the site of one of the state's most disturbing cases. Hope Rippey, along with 3 other teenagers, took part in harming Shanda Scherer, with actions so extreme they shocked the community and the nation. The case would expose the dangerous escalation of teenage jealousy and peer pressure. But what transforms teenage conflict into something so extreme? The situation stemmed from a love triangle involving Shanda and another person in the group. Melinda Loveless, the ringleader, had become intensely jealous over a relationship situation. And this jealousy spiraled into obsessive anger. Rippey, along with Lori Tackett and Tony Lawrence, became involved in Loveless's plans. Rippey's background revealed a troubled adolescence. Born in 1976, she had experienced her parents' divorce in 1984 during a turbulent period when the family lived in Michigan, though they later reconciled. By 15, Rippey was engaging in self-harm, and she had fallen under the influence of Tackett, who encouraged darker behaviors. On that January night, the group lured Shanda from her home under false pretenses. Once they had her in their vehicle, they drove her to a remote location. What followed was prolonged and horrific, with the group subjecting Shanda to extended harm before ultimately burning her. How could multiple teenagers participate in something so extreme? The forensic evidence was devastating. Shanda had been beaten, stabbed, and ultimately burned while still showing signs of life. The autopsy revealed the full scope of what she had endured before dying. Her body was found in a field, showing evidence of having been set on fire. The investigation broke open when Rippey and Lawrence gave statements to police, describing what had happened and their roles in it. Their accounts became key to understanding the full timeline and who had done what during that terrible night. During the events, Rippey had taunted Shanda, saying, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" showing a cruel detachment from the reality of what was happening. This statement would haunt her case and public perception of her role. The legal proceedings focused on determining individual culpability. While Lovelace was clearly the instigator and Tackett actively participated, Rippey's role was considered somewhat lesser, though still significant. She had been present, had participated in luring Shanda, and had failed to stop what was happening. Rippey ultimately received a sentence of 60 years, though this would later be reduced. The judge acknowledged that while she was not the primary actor, her presence and participation enabled the tragedy to occur. Her cooperation with investigators was taken into account during sentencing. What happened to those involved after the case? In 2011, Rippey appeared on Dr. Phil along with Shanda's mother in a confrontation that drew national attention. The meeting was emotional and difficult, with Shanda's mother facing the young woman who had been part of taking her daughter away. Rippey was released from prison in 2006 after serving 14 years. She remained on parole until 2011, at which point her supervision ended. As of 2025, no further public updates about her whereabouts or activities have been reported. But the final case would show how jealousy can drive someone to unthinkable lengths. Sarah Ann Kolb. On January 21, 2005, East Moline, Illinois became the site of a case that would horrify the Quad Cities area. Sarah Ann Kolb took the life of Adrian Reynolds, a classmate she had befriended, in an act driven by jealousy over a relationship. What made this case particularly disturbing was what happened after, as Kolb and an accomplice attempted to conceal what they had done. But how does jealousy transform into something so calculated? Kolb had been living with her mother and stepfather and was described as popular before circumstances changed. She had developed feelings for Corey Gregory, and when Gregory showed interest in Adrian Reynolds instead, Kolb's jealousy intensified to dangerous levels. Adrian had recently moved to the area and was trying to make friends. She had reached out to both Kolb and Gregory, not realizing the complicated dynamics between them. Evidence later showed Adrian had written to Kolb asking, "Why do you hate me so much?" showing she was aware of tension but not the depth of danger she faced. On that January day, Kolb and Gregory convinced Adrian to skip school with them. They drove to a fast food restaurant parking lot, and what happened next would be pieced together through evidence and statements. Kolb strangled Adrian with a belt, ending her life in the vehicle. What came next showed calculation beyond the initial act. Kolb and Gregory attempted to burn Adrian's body, but when that proved unsuccessful, they dismembered her remains with a saw and disposed of parts in different locations. The brutality of the concealment shocked investigators. How did authorities uncover what happened? The investigation gained momentum when Gregory provided information about where remains could be found. Investigators also discovered Kolb's journal, which contained threats toward Adrian, showing premeditation and intent. The forensic evidence combined with witness statements built a comprehensive case. During legal proceedings, Kolb attempted to portray herself as an unwilling participant, claiming Gregory had been the driving force. However, evidence showed Kolb's active role in both the initial act and the extensive cover-up that followed. Gregory, who cooperated more fully, described events as a fight that went too far, though prosecutors argued the evidence showed more planning than a spontaneous fight. The first trial ended in mistrial, prolonging the legal process. Eventually, Kolb was convicted and received a sentence of 53 years in prison. The sentence reflected both the seriousness of taking Adrian's life and the disturbing actions taken afterward to conceal the situation. In recent years, Kolb sought resentencing, arguing that sentences given to young offenders should be reconsidered. In 2023, an appellate court denied this request, stating, failed to show violation of Eighth Amendment, and determining the original sentence was appropriate given the circumstances. As of 2025, Kolb, now known as Shane and 36 years old, is at Logan Correctional Center in Illinois. All appeals have been denied, and the 53-year sentence stands. Release is not projected until well into the future. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.